Welcome to my mini lecture on plant nutrition. This chapter is really all about how plants acquire mineral nutrients that they need to grow and to reproduce. We're going to talk about nutritional requirements from macro to micronutrients and how those nutrients are incorporated into the plant. We're also going to talk about nutrient uptake and nitrogen fixation in plants. And last but not least, nutritional adaptations. So what do plants need to grow? Well, you probably guessed CO2 and water at the very least. But they also need essential nutrients. We're going to talk about in what form they get them, how they get them, and are there unwanted molecules in the soil, and how do plants deal with that? So water and nutrients are going to occur or be absorbed through specialized proteins in the plasma membrane. We've already talked about some of these specialized proteins before. Nitrogen and phosphorus are often acquired through fungal associations, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There are toxins in the soil, and some plants have really good mechanisms for excluding or dealing with toxins. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the specialized mechanisms for dealing with toxins, as well as active transport into cell vacuoles where some of these can be stored. And then specialized methods of acquiring nutrients, that's associations with nitrogen fixing bacteria, parasitism, as well as being carnivorous plants. So where does the mass of plants come from? And how would you set up an experiment to test your hypothesis? Think about that for a minute. Where do the mass of plants come from? Well, most of the time when I ask students this question, they say, well, from the soil. But actually, that's not really the case. So where do plants get their mass? Well, in the early 1600s, there was a classic experiment by Jean-Baptiste van Helmont, who suggested that new plant material came from water. Well, that wasn't really the case. Material from plants really comes from CO2 in the atmosphere. But van Helmont didn't know about gas and that it had mass. Water is also a major component. But how could we tell how much mass comes from water versus CO2? Well, he did this classic experiment where essentially you take a known amount of soil and a known amount of plant, you put it in some sort of container, you water it for 5 years, and then you basically take that and figure out how much it weighs. And what you'll find essentially is that so in this experiment, you can see that they took a known mass of soil and a plant, and they grew it by only just watering it for 5 years. And when they took these things apart again, what they saw was the mass of the plant increased, but the soil pretty much stayed the same. So that would indicate that even though we added water and we added soil, that actually very little of it comes from the soil. So what nutrients do you think are essential for plant growth? So we already said that CO2, which is where that carbon comes from, that eventually becomes the mass of the plant. But they do need nutrients and things from the soil. And there are quite a few nutrients that are essential nutrients. There are 17 elements that are essential. That's C, H, and O, right? 96% of the dry weight of plants. Once again, that's 96% of the dry weight of plants is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and obtained from H2O, so water, or CO2 versus the soil. So almost all of what a plant becomes is really from water and carbon dioxide. But there are other things that are essential for plant growth, macronutrients and micronutrients. As you can see from this graph, this shows you the 3 major parts of the plant, the minerals that are most important for the plant to grow, or the elements that are essential for the plant to grow. But there are also other nutrients that are macronutrients, and these are nutrients that are needed in a relatively large amount. You can see the percent of the total dry weight is anywhere from 0.1 to 1.5. That's not huge, but if they do not have them, they will not grow, or they will not grow properly. And you can see here that many of them are things that you know about that are in fertilizer: nitrogen, potassium, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and sulfur. But there are also micronutrients, and these are things that they need in a tiny amount, but they do need them to grow properly. And you can see the amounts here. They're very, very, very small amounts. And you can see that these are many of the things that you're familiar with and many of the things that we associate with minerals in general. So macronutrients, they need a lot of. They're the building blocks of nucleic acids, proteins, carbohydrates, phospholipids. They're limiting nutrients, so they limit plant growth, and so you need that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and they're often found in fertilizer. Micronutrients, on the other hand, they need just a tiny bit, but they are major cofactors for specific enzymes. And remember, we talked about coenzymes and cofactors when we talked about cell biology. And so these are the same things that you need for your enzymes to work properly. This is why you take vitamins and minerals, or why you need them from food that you eat if you don't take them. So some nutrient deficiencies have distinctive symptoms. Yellowing of leaves usually indicates what? So this is talked about in your book. They look at different types of things you can notice in your plant. So it's like a little detective work for you. And you can look at these different things in your plant and see if you can figure out what kind of deficiencies they have. So yellowing of leaves is usually associated with nitrogen deficiency. And here's a graph from your book, or an image from your book, that shows you this nitrogen deficiency. And it also shows you a little bit about what potassium deficiency looks like, or phosphorus, excuse me. So when diagnosing a plant problem, if mobile nutrients are in short supply, what would you expect to happen? So there are nutrients that are mobile and there are nutrients that are non-mobile. And so if a mobile nutrient is in short supply, that means that it can move around the plant. Where would you expect to see them in short supply? So look at these questions here. So answers, is it deterioration both younger and older leaves? Younger leaves would be the first to show. Older leaves would be the first to deteriorate, or there'd be no symptoms. So if you think about mobility, where is the plant going to allocate nutrients if there are not very many, okay, or if not very much, it's in short supply? Well, you're going to see it in the older leaves first. So the plant will allocate it to new growth because that's really where it needs it. And we will definitely see it in older leaves. If it was a non-mobile, you would see that in younger leaves because they wouldn't be able to be mobilized and move to the new growth. There are mobile nutrients, and these are common nutrients that you can see here. So we are nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and magnesium. And when they're in limited supply, they're transferred to newer leaves. Immobile nutrients are things like iron and calcium, and they remain in older leaves because they can't be moved, and the scarcity is reflected in newer leaves. So what about hydroponic growth? You may have heard this before. You should be able to define this and explain what it's used for and the benefits of this approach. And when I mean what it's used for is not just what it's used for growing your delicious, very small salad greens that you probably eat, but also for experiments, right? Think about how it could be used for an experiment. If you had a question about limiting factors in agriculture, you could use hydroponics for a solution. That's not even just about a question, but like if you're trying to grow things when you don't have necessarily the right soil, etc. So there's a really great video that I've asked you to watch, and that's here in this mini lecture. So please do look at it. It's How Do Plants Grow? And it talks a bit about this video talks a bit about how hydroponics works and how it could be potentially a solution. When key nutrients are in short supply, hydroponic growth can be used to study nutritional deficiencies. Because if you think about it, it's much like growing a bacteria in a nutrient agar. You can actually provide it with certain things, limit other things, and see how that affects growth because you don't have the confounding factor of the soil. So the benefit of this approach is that it allows precise control of available nutrients because you put it into the water. And different deficiencies can have distinctive symptoms. So you can see these deficiencies when you add some things to the water but not others. And you can see by this image here, these would be normal growth, and then this would be a copper deficient tomato. So this would be a way for you to figure out actually what is causing this deficiency. So if you're growing it out in soil, it would give you some idea. If you were seeing some problems, this would help you figure out what is the actual thing that's causing the problem. How would you expect the root system of plant grown by hydroponics to compare to a root system of a plant grown in soil? So think about that. So if it was grown in a hydroponic system, would you expect it to be the same, more developed, less developed, or absent? So this is the root system. Well, it would be less developed, right? Because plants won't need to seek out nutrients because it's going to be all provided for it. It's going to be bathed in the nutrients in that water solution. Now that we've talked a little bit about nutrients, we will return a little bit to talking about soil, because soil is part of the story, right? The plants are growing in soil for the most part, right? Unless they have different adaptations. So what are the components that make up soil? Soil is super important naturally for the growth of plants. And there are forces that are caused by weathering that allow for the breakdown of basically solid rock to soil. And you know that because you know that there are some soils that are more clay, there are some soils that are more silty, there are some soils that are more gravelly, and that's because they all are coming from originally from rock. And so you can see this image here where you have the wind breaking apart the rock, those particles are broken down, water helps in that process, so do organisms, and then you end up with all these different types of soil texture here. So what's the difference between dirt and soil? Well, think about what might be the difference between dirt and soil. And people who study soil really hate it when people call it dirt, because dirt is going to be soil that doesn't have any organisms or nutrients in it. We hear the word humus, which is, or humus, I've heard people call it. Really should be humus, I guess. Which is all those organisms that occupy those rock fragments, and they add stuff to the rock. And there's a very cool TED Talk that talks a little bit about why that's so important. So mature soils have a complex mixture of not only inorganic compounds, so all of that rock and stuff that's broken down, but also organic. It has soil-dwelling organisms that help break down the soil, add nutrients, they poop in the soil, they break down plant material, so they're very, very important, particularly when we talk about the prokaryotes that we forget about often. They're playing a very, very important role in adding to the complexity of the soil. What affects the rate of soil formation? Well, a lot of things affect that. So climate affects that, topography, time, the parent material, so whether it came from, I don't know, clay, or a certain type of rock, and then the biology, what organisms are present there. And so there are a bunch of cool videos that are great to watch to help educate you about soil, but this shows you a little bit about the complexity of soil and all the different organisms that play a role in making soil effective. When we talk about the importance of soil, we should also be talking about soil erosion and the problems that are associated with soil erosion. There's a lot of work now on soil conservation, specifically because we have such a problem with soil erosion. And soil erosion occurs when soil is carried away by wind or water. You know we've been having a lot of floods in the last decades or so, or just in general for a long time, but increasingly more so. And we've had a lot of different kinds of windstorms. And so that affects soil. And we know from the Dust Bowl experience, when things were over-farmed and trees were cut down, that caused a major change in different areas of the United States where a lot of agriculture was done. You can read about the effects of soil erosion, but what that meant was all that soil was moved around. There was major soil erosion. There's some great videos that you can watch and learn about the Dust Bowl and effects of soil erosion. There's also some really tragic, I mean, the Dust Bowl was tragic, but not in a very short period of time, but over a long period of time. It had a lot of people that died from mostly starvation. But in 2014, very close here, the Oso mudslide, and many of you might have heard about it, where it was a major mudslide. It's about 4 miles east of Oso, Washington. A major portion of a hill collapsed and it killed 43 people. There's some videos here that you can learn a little bit about what happened, but a lot of that was associated with soil erosion. And this is kind of what it looked like. It fell on top of basically a whole bunch of houses, and those people died. And there is a memorial there. If you drive out in that direction, you'll see it, but this is what it looked like after the slide. Thank you for watching my mini lecture on plant nutrition.